What's up there, do-it-yourselfers? Today we're going to talk about something that happens often and pretty much to everyone that's been driving used cars long enough, and that is you suspect you have a blown head gasket. Now, you know, your car might be overheating, might be smoking out the tailpipes or has coolant in the oil, and now you're faced with a decision to make, and that is should you replace the head gasket or the engine? You might be getting different points of views, different advice from different people. Now you're kind of confused. Now if you make the wrong decision, it could cost you a lot more than it really should, and so that's what I'm gonna try to help you figure out today. So if you're watching this video and you suspect you have a bad head gasket, but you cannot put in the labor yourself to try to correct it or try to fix the problem, and you have to get it done at a shop, in those cases, generally speaking, I suggest that you just go ahead and replace the engine. Because as we're going to discuss later in this video, it's rarely just the head gasket. It's you know, at the best case, it's a head gasket. You need to replace the head gasket, plus send your cylinder head to a machine shop to be pressure checked for cracks and also resurfaced. At the very worst, you have a cracked block or a cracked bottom end part of your engine is cracked, and you need to replace your engine anyway. But when you take this, when you take your car to a mechanic shop, what they're going to probably tell you is that they need to remove the cylinder head, and then they'll be able to tell you what the problem is exactly and what you need to do. The problem with that is that the labor cost of removing the cylinder head equals, or a lot of times it's more than the labor cost of replacing an engine. And in a case that, let's say they remove the cylinder head and they say, okay, you need to rebuild the cylinder head, you need to resurface it, pressure check, and also the block is somewhat warped, so we cannot really guarantee our work, or something along those lines. Or maybe they say we need to take out the block as well and have that resurfaced. Okay, well, your cost just maybe double or triple the cost of replacing an engine, because all this stuff is you're gonna have to pay them for the labor of taking everything apart. Then you're gonna have to pay a machine shop for doing their work, whereas you were just to replace the engine, you only be out the cost of replacing the engine and the labor it would require to replace the engine. And again, generally speaking, the labor of replacing, let's say, a 4-cylinder engine, a lot of times it's less than replacing the head gasket. Not always, but a lot of times. Again, if you're in that situation, what I would suggest you do is just call around to your local junkyards. Also, do the best you can to find the most reputable junkyard in your area. Get different prices for your engine. Also get installation costs, because most of them will also install your engine. And definitely make sure they give you a warranty. Get at least a 90 days warranty on a used engine you're buying from them. And after you agree on the price, on the cost of labor and the warranty, then you tow your car straight to the junkyard, have them install the new engine or the used engine on your car, and then you should be good to go. Alright, now if you can put in the labor yourself, it's still somewhat complicated, more than one would imagine. My general rule of thumb is that if the engine I'm working on is has a cast aluminum block, I don't deal with trying to replace the head gasket. I just replace the engine. Now there's exceptions to the rules, and I'll explain a little bit. But the problem with those engines is that an aluminum block engine, aluminum is a softer metal and also lighter. That's why they use it for efficiency purposes. But since it's a softer metal, when you overheat an engine, aluminum is much more likely to warp or crack than cast iron blocked engines. And a lot of times, even if you remove the cylinder head, those cracks are not visible to a naked eye. You're going to have to remove the engine, take it to a machine shop, have it pressure tested, and the list of things you're going to have to do to make sure that aluminum block is not damaged is a long list, but also more time consuming than you would imagine. The cast iron block with an aluminum head that's got potential head gasket issues, then I do dive into those and try to salvage those motors. As far as aluminum blocks are concerned, there are exceptions to the rule, like I said, and I could use the example like the Subaru engines. They do have an aluminum block, but their blocks are somewhat beefier, and they're also known for having head gasket issues that don't really, most of the time don't affect the block. You gotta do your own research and figure out if you have an aluminum block engine, whether that particular engine is good, can withstand overheating issues and whatnot. But unless I know for sure, for a fact, something like a Subaru engine, in fact, I can't think of any other aluminum blocked engines that I would consider not replacing the engine than Subarus, off the top of my head, that is. And if you are wondering whether your car has an aluminum block or a cast iron block, a quick check is to just use a magnet. Get a magnet, touch your block. If it sticks, like it does to this Chrysler made 2.4 liter engine, then you got a cast iron block. If it doesn't, you have an aluminum block. Alright, so if you're doing the job yourself and you do have a cast iron block and you have decided you want to open up the cylinder head and try to fix it yourself, there's a couple of things you need to pay attention to. First, you need to find out what was the original cause of your blown head gasket or your potentially blown head gasket. You know, head gaskets, they just don't go bad on their own. Something causes it, whether your thermostat gets stuck closed, or your radiator's clogged, or your radiator fans maybe stopped working. Whatever the reason, you need to find out and fix that problem before you go any further. Alright, and the second thing you want to check is whether you have coolant in your oil or oil in your coolant. Now, if you have oil in your coolant, then there's a couple of likely scenarios. Two of them are good. Well, relatively speaking, they're good, but one of them is pretty bad. We'll start with the first one. If you have oil in your coolant, one of the causes could be a bad or a cracked engine oil cooler. Now, your engine oil needs to be cooled, because if it's not cooled, the heat from your engine, it's going to heat it up, and when it heats up past a certain temperature, it gets really, really thin and doesn't provide much lubrication at all. In fact, for your engine, your bearings are going to come in contact with your crankshaft, and they're going to get damaged, and your engine is going to fail. Now, the way they cool your engine oil is just through your engine oil cooler. There's two coolant lines, one supply and one return, and then pressurized engine oil runs through this cooler and gets cooled by the coolant. Now, they're not supposed to come in contact with each other, obviously, but sometimes these develop cracks. And whenever these develop cracks inside the housing here, it's always oil that goes to the coolant and not coolant in the oil, because oil is always at a higher pressure. Your cooling system, the highest, usually it's about I guess 12 to 13 psi, but engine oil is usually under a lot more pressure than that. And so it's always, when a crack happens here, there's always oil that goes to coolant, not the other way around. Alright, another likely scenario if you have oil in your coolant is that your transmission oil is leaking into your cooling system. Now, much like your engine oil, your transmission oil also needs to be cooled and kept within a certain range. Now, this is only applicable if you have an automatic transmission, by the way. And so the way they cool your automatic transmission fluid is usually through your radiator. And if you ever remove the radiator from a car equipped with an automatic transmission, most likely you've had to remove two lines that run to the bottom of your radiator. And these lines supply transmission fluid and run transmission fluid towards the bottom of your radiator. There's tubes that the transmission fluid travels through, and coolant is running by those tubes, and the purpose is that they cool the transmission fluid. Now again, sometimes those tubes develop a crack in the bottom of your radiator, and then you have transmission oil leaking into your cooling system, because again, usually transmission fluid is at a higher pressure, but sometimes it's not. So sometimes you could have transmission fluid leaking to the cooling system. Other times you could have coolant leaking into your transmission. So you want to keep that in mind. But it's a possibility that you cannot overlook. And if you ever suspect that that's what's happening, is what you need to do is to remove the radiator, take it to a shop or a machine shop or a radiator shop, and have a pressure test it, and they'll be able to tell you whether you have a problem with your radiator or it's something else. And the last and the worst likely scenario is that you have a cracked block or a cracked cylinder head. And again, if you have a cracked block and the crack is from where the oil is pressurized, and it's the line that supplies oil, pressurized oil from the bottom of the engine towards your cylinder head, and is supplying lubrication for your camshafts and lifters and whatnot. If it cracks from that line towards the center of the engine, then you'll always have, again, oil entering the cooling system instead of coolant system, or coolant entering your the oil side, because again, oil is at a lot higher pressure than your coolant is, and it's always going to go oil to coolant. I personally don't, wouldn't, even if there was a cast iron block that had oil in the coolant, and I suspected that it had a crack either in the block or the cylinder head, I don't bother trying to fix those engines. I replace them because sometimes finding that crack in the block is pretty hard. In fact, it could, take a lot of man hours and take a lot of time, sometimes even more money than it would cost to replace that entire engine. So, if you think that you can find that crack in the block, then, go ahead and do it. But I would advise against it because you might miss it. I mean, even if you take off the cylinder head, take it to a machine shop, they pressure test it and say, okay, we found a crack in your cylinder head. Maybe it's not the only crack. The block could still be cracked and you won't know it. And if you're gonna go spend all that money, machining a cylinder head, putting it back on, then driving down the street, and then again you find out you had another crack in the block that you couldn't find, you just wasted all that money and time. So might as well just replace that engine. So next, let's talk about if you have coolant in your oil. In those cases, the most likely scenario is that you have a bad head gasket plus warped cylinder head and maybe cracked cylinder head as well. But what happens in those instances where the cylinder head is cracked is that the crack happens from the coolant side to the combustion side, and and as your piston goes up and down, it's going to push combustion gases into your cooling system, and then when it goes down, it's going to suck some coolant into the combustion chamber. That coolant is going to leak down towards the bottom of your crankcase, and that's how you know you have coolant in your oil. What you want to make sure though is that if you ever see coolant in your oil, you want to stop driving that car right away, because too much coolant in your oil, or if you drive a car with really any noticeable amount of coolant, the coolant is going to damage your bearings. It doesn't have the characteristics of an engine oil, obviously, and it's not going to provide the right amount of lubrication. It's going to damage your bearings, and then you're going to have to replace that engine anyway, instead of having a chance at just taking the cylinder head off and dealing with a head gasket issue. Alright, and if you ever pull off a cylinder head off of a cast iron block and you want to check the warpage, you want to make sure you use a machinist straight edge to check the warpage on your cylinder head. And also the engine block side, you want to check for warpage too. I see a lot of people use metal straight edge or a carpenter straight edge that you can buy at Home Depot. Those are not the right tools to check warpage when you're measuring in thousandths of an inch increments. And you want to make sure you use this tool, the right tool for the right job, machinist straight edge. A lot of machine shops will lend it to you or maybe rent it to you for like, I don't know, 10 bucks a day or so if you ask them nicely. Alright, and if you use this tool and you find out that your cylinder head is warped, the amount of warpage from, I don't know, hold on, I'm not a machinist, but the machine shops I've talked to, they told me that usually a cylinder head can be resurfaced and reused as long as the warpage does not exceed 0.007 thousandths of an inch at any point on your cylinder head. Now if your cylinder head is warped more than that, you are either going to have to replace the cylinder head or have the machine shop heat that cylinder head up and try to strain it out to a point where they can resurface it and have you use it on your car. But I would recommend just going ahead and buying a rebuilt cylinder head. You can get really good deals on eBay as far as rebuilt cylinder heads goes, and you can get a good deal. And when you get a rebuilt cylinder head, you don't have to pay for a compression test, resurfacing the cylinder head, and other things. And especially if you buy from a reputable buyer on a reputable seller on eBay. Don't forget to use this to check the warpage on your block side as well. Your block side has to be, even though it's a cast iron block, and we're doing this on a cast iron block as I recommended, it could still be warped. And talking to machine shops though, there's very, very minor warpage allowed, and that is, let's say if you have 0.002 thousandths of an inch amount of warpage on your block, but you resurface your cylinder head. So in other words, your total amount of warpage between your block's mating surface and your cylinder head's mating surface is 0.002 thousandths of an inch, then you're okay. But if it's any more than that, maybe even 0.003 thousandths of an inch might be okay, but more than that, then you might run into problems, especially if you have resurfaced your cylinder head, but your block is warped, 0.004 or 5 or 6 thousandths of an inch, then your head gasket might work, but it may not last, so you want to keep that in mind when checking your warpage on your block and your cylinder head. Also, a tip I can give you when checking warpage on the block is to thoroughly clean the edges of your block, because a lot of times you got corrosion and buildup on those edges, and if you don't clean them up and the ends of this is laying on those, then you could put your filler gauge in there and say, oh my god, I have 0.009 thousandths of an inch of warpage here, but your block could be totally fine. You just didn't clean the sides, and this is sitting on those, showing you a false reading. Alright, if you have coolant in your oil, there's something else that could cause it, and that is your lower intake manifold gasket or your intake manifold. But in those cases though, you're going to have good compression and you're not going to be smoking out the tailpipe. You could be overheating due to the loss of the excessive amount of coolant being lost into your crankcase, but if you catch it on time, or you catch it in time, you can just replace your lower intake manifold gasket or your lower intake manifold and then be on your way. Just as long as you catch it in time and the coolant doesn't get a chance to either damage the bearings or your car doesn't overheat because of loss of a lot of coolant and cause other damage like a head gasket, you should be able to just get away with replacing your intake manifold gaskets. Alright, and that should about cover it. So hopefully this video will help you decide whether you should replace the head gasket or your engine, or if you're going to be replacing your head gasket yourself, how to do it properly and what to look out for. So with that said, hope this video helps people out there. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more like it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.